So there is a common question I get all the time, that is how much programming or coding knowledge I must have to start with AWS or cloud computing in general. So in this video, we will find out the answer for this question. I have divided this video into 3 sections. In the first section, we will discuss some of the tasks that you can perform without any programming inside AWS. In the second section, we will see some examples that requires programming. And in the final section, I will show you what is the bare minimum amount of programming you can learn to start with AWS. Alright, so inside AWS, there are many tasks that does not need any coding experience, or you don't have to do any kind of programming to perform those, right? Actually, there is a lot of tasks related to that. So you can just log into the console and perform this task. The first example I can give you is, let's say you are using your S3 bucket, how you are using your Google Drive. And in many companies, they're actually doing this. They're just using an S3 bucket as a Google Drive. So they're storing different kind of company documents inside an S3 bucket. And they're just logging into the console. And the S3 console that AWS is by default giving you, they're just using those to upload, delete, view any kind of documents that is present inside S3, right? So this is first one. Second one can be, if you are a database engineer and you are just configuring different databases for the developers, then you can configure those databases from console. You can provision different database. You can change the capacity for those databases as well. Okay, so configuring database is another thing that you can perform without coding, okay, from the console. Second thing is, if you're accessing your EC2 instance, let's say you have provisioned an EC2 instance, and from your local system through SSH or from Cloud Shell, if you are familiar with that, you can communicate with this EC2 instance. So in that case also, you don't need any kind of coding unless you are doing any kind of bash scripting. But in this situation, you have to understand how to use a command line interface. So this is another example where you are not using any kind of coding. Right. And finally, if you are just managing the IAM, like which user will have which kind of access, so then also you can configure all the IAM related stuff from the console as well. In that situation also, you are not using any kind of coding or programming. Alright, so there are some tasks inside AWS that requires coding, right? So if you do not have any programming knowledge, then you cannot perform this task. And the first service that I can tell you is AWS Lambda. So if you want to use AWS Lambda, then you have to understand programming, right? So the basic concept of AWS Lambda is you will be having your function code or a code block, and you will hand over this code block to Lambda, and Lambda will provision all the resources and all the runtime for you. Okay, and you can use many runtime for this. You can use Node.js, Java, Python. It supports some other languages as well, I guess, like .NET. So yeah, if you want to use AWS Lambda, then in that situation, you have to understand programming. The next example I can give you is this EC2 user data, right? Now, and EC2 user data is when you are provisioning this EC2 instance, you can pass a shell script, and this can be a sudo script for that. So these are some CLI instruction, you can say. It's like install and update everything, install Nginx web server. Let's say you are creating a web server on this EC2 instance, right? Then you have to install and configure after provisioning the instance. So you can perform those things once this EC2 instance is up and running. Okay. So when you provision the EC2 instance, the first thing it will do is it will execute this script, right? So you have to understand how to put together this kind of shell script or bash scripting. So this is the second example I can give you where you need some sort of programming knowledge. All right, next comes this AWS SDK, right? So there are many services inside AWS that you have to use from a programming environment. It does not make any sense to communicate with these services from the console. So if I give you an example, let's say DynamoDB database. So there will be some sort of application, and from that application you will storing the data, reading the data. Okay, so you need some sort of programming environment to do that. Okay, and there's a thing called AWS SDK, Software Development Kit, and they have this kind of SDK for all the famous languages. So you can install this SDK. Let's say you are having a Node.js environment, and from that Node.js environment you want to upload a file into the S3 bucket. So you can use this kind of SDK. So this is another scenario where you are using programming. Alright, so next comes this infrastructure as a code. Now, when you are using any cloud provider, it's very rare that you will be using a single service. So for a simple web application also, maybe you are using 2 servers, 3 databases, and to store the images or objects. Maybe you need an object storage. So there will be many services that you'll be using, and to configure and provision these services from the console, it's not a good idea. Okay, so to solve that problem, there's a concept called infrastructure as a code. So you will be having a declarative approach like this. So you can write these things in JSON or YAML format. So let's say I need two EC2 instances on security group on database to S3 bucket, and I can configure these. I can open different permission for these things. Let's say I want to access this database from the EC2 instance. These kind of things I can mention in this file, and this is called a cloud formation script. Okay, and you write this cloud formation script in JSON and YAML format. But to write this cloud formation script from scratch is not a very pleasant experience. Okay, so to solve this problem, they have introduced another tool called AWS CDK or Cloud Development Kit. So basically, inside CDK, you can use your favorite programming language. Let's say you are using Python or TypeScript, and you can use your programming language to generate this infrastructure as a code. All right, so this is another example where you need programming to declare your infrastructure. Now, before going into the final sections, I have one request. If you want to learn AWS or cloud computing, then I think this channel can help you a lot. So if you didn't subscribe yet, please consider subscribing. All right, so let us discuss what are the things you should learn for the programming part. Now, the first thing is command line interface. Now, if you are not familiar with CLI, then you should learn the CLI first before going into anything. And inside the CLI, there are many things, and this is a list. This is a short list, you can say. And first, you should start with these things. Okay, you should know what is a file system, how to navigate through the file system, how to create different directories and files. Okay, different files, ownership. On the right side, I'm just showing you some example commands. So if you want, you can take a screenshot of this. And first, you should learn these things in the command line interface. In the second part, we want bash scripting. When you are comfortable with this command line interface, like you can perform this command, like how to create a directory, how to change the ownership of a file. If you are familiar with those commands, then you can go to the bash scripting part. Bash scripting is basically like you are just combining this command, and you are just creating a script. Script means you are introducing different if else command and conditional logic. You're declaring different variables, right? So in the second step, you should learn bash scripting. Once you are comfortable with bash scripting, you don't have to be a master at bash scripting. Like the very basic concept is fine. Like if you ask me to write an if statement in bash, I won't be able to do that without checking Google, right? So just get familiar with this type of syntax, and when you are writing things, get help from cheat sheet. All right, and finally, you should learn a programming language. Now, if you are a complete beginner, and I'm assuming you are, then there are two options that I would suggest you. The first option is Python, and the second option is Node.js with JavaScript. Right now, if your main focus is let's say data engineering, AI, ML, those kind of things, then it's a good idea to go with Python. But if you have interest on web development, app development, and development in general, then I think JavaScript will be a good choice for you. All right, so this is the two programming language, and again, you don't have to be a master. You just have to know the basics, and with the practice, it will take you a couple of weeks maybe to get the familiarity with the programming languages. Okay, then I guess you are good to go. All right, so that's all for this video. If you have any further questions, please let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.